From multiple editable locations in Minneapolis, or near enough, this is Nice Games Club, the show where nice game devs talk gaming and game development. I'm Ellen Burns-Johnson, and I make nice games.
I'm Steve McGregor, and I make nice games.
And I'm Martha Croy, I too make nice games.
In this episode, we talk with Charles McGregor, solo developer of the game Hyperdot, to discuss designing and creating level editor tools in games. And so, if everyone is ready, let's start.
Charles, the floor is open if you have anything to start us with.
No, I don't actually have anything.
Oh boy, I was real nervous. If y'all didn't listen to the last episode, don't. I just get grilled for like an hour and 10 minutes.
Charles came out swinging.
3 years to build up the fury to say something like you did in last week's episode. So we'll have you back on. Well, Stephen, you do have to say something objectionable, and then we'll have Charles on 3 years later to chew you out about it. So we'll put that on the calendar.
That's how that goes.
That won't be hard. I say a lot of things.
Well, Charles, other than being brother to the show, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name's Charles McGregor. I'm the sole developer of Hyperdot and Tribe Games, which is now going in 10th year. Going under that name.
Yeah.
It's not as like an official business. It's been like 4 years as an official business.
You've had the shirt for that long.
I've had the shirt for like 6 years.
Okay. That's what counts.
Yeah. Actually, Tribe Games started out because my brother didn't want to make games with me.
There it is. I knew I'd get thrown under the bus eventually.
There it is. Yeah. So my dad and my brother both were like, I don't want to work on games. Like my dad was like, had a legit excuse. He didn't want to work on games after he did his day job work.
Yeah.
And then like have his child be like, yeah, Dad, I want to make games.
Especially when we saw the org chart and you at the top of it.
I was like, yeah, I want to be here. And he's like, nah.
I need more creative control.
Yeah, I'd like to hire you. The pay is nothing.
Yes. But yeah, but my brother was all like, yeah, I don't want to make games. I don't like programming. So in response to that, we'll go with response to that. I basically was like, oh, okay, well, I'll make a game first to show that, hey, this is actually a thing that we can do. This is a viable thing that we can do.
He didn't give up on you, Stephen.
Yeah. And then
even after you gave up on him.
Exactly.
I came back. We got the game together.
Charles, how old were you when this all went down?
I guess I was 16 when this was happening.
That's pretty cool.
26.
Wait.
Yeah.
Am I 27?
Oh my.
I thought I was 26.
Oh, it's so fun to listen to people who still keep track.
We're recording this a few days before my birthday, too, so that's part of it.
I'm like, am I still in my mid-30s? Probably, but I'm not going to look into it.
Yeah, that's where I am now. I have to do the math now.
Well,
and I just don't.
Okay, well, enough of this frivolity, everybody. Charles, you had been working on Hyperdot, a game that came out this year for how many years, roughly?
I am now on my 4th year.
Okay, which, for a solo game at the scale of Hyperdot, you're not setting any records, but it is a long time. But one of the things you did to make your work on it longer was you put in a full level editor. And that's what you wanted to talk about today on the show, right?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I wasn't even planning on having a level editor when I first started. I was just going to be like, yeah, I don't need to make a level editor. Even though I said, yeah, I'll make 100 levels. No problem. I'll just like type it in by hand. No issues there.
Yeah.
And actually, Lane, who also works on Fidgets, was like, yeah, you're going to need to make a level editor. I was like, nah. And after I made I attempted to make the second level. I was like, yeah, I'm going to have to make a level editor.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty common story, is that there'll be internal level editor tools, and they'll usually be pretty janky, or really only suited for internal use. But not uncommonly, it'll be like, let's just cross some T's and dot an I or two, and then maybe we can bundle this with the game. And it looked like, but you put in some real time to make it user friendly, right?
Yeah. So yeah, after that initial, I'll actually make some type of level editor. I just wanted to have it so that it wasn't like a in-game level editor. It was just a level editor inside of the Unity editor. So I was able to adjust values more simply rather than me having to make variables and then go into the things and then doing all this other stuff that is extremely tedious and time consuming, especially when I wanted to test something.
Yeah.
Because then I'd be like, oh, I'll do this.
And especially in Unity, I'll say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because the time between me pressing the play button, waiting, then going into the game and then actually testing the thing and then realizing, oh, I forgot to change this variable or save this or whatever. And then pressing the pause button and then going back and then be like, okay, I changed it. And then doing that. Like that entire process was, it was really quick where I was like, yeah, I have to make some type of editor in some form, shape or form, especially for like some, eventually it'll be like live updates so that I can just like press the start button and now I'm in. That was the one thing that maybe 5 levels in, I was like, yeah, I desire that.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So the level editor didn't start out. I mean, it didn't start out like a fully fleshed out level editor that like any player could use, right? Like it's.
Oh, no.
The way you were describing it, it sounded like you used the Unity editor to edit values, but eventually it morphed into something that was more palpable for the average player.
Yeah. I'd say like, again, it's rough estimates, but like maybe 10 levels in, I was at that point, I was saying like, yeah, maybe I should adapt this to be something that people can actually play with. And have it so that like, oh yeah, if you want to use this stuff, you'll have the exact same tools that I have, because that's something that in games I've always really respected and appreciated, is if I basically had the same tools as the developer when making things. Like Littlebigplanet is a famous one where it's like, yes, the tools that you are using, we are using in order to make our levels and custom stuff, especially like for like Dreams and Media Molecule.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was like, yeah, I want to make sure that that is something that is apparent, and I adhere to those guidelines and principles. And then at that point, I was like, okay, I'll work on making this a little bit more user friendly than what I started out with, because it was very much this. I am the only person that will be able to use this. And
it's too reflective of Charles' brain.
Yeah, I don't know whether or not I've fully succeeded in that, but it is a lot better from where it was from before. But yeah, so yeah, I really wanted to make sure that whatever I could do in Hyperdot, you can do in your own levels and things.
Charles, I'm not sure if you can characterize it this way, but and this is really something I'd only ever ask someone to do in hindsight, because anything else would just be a complete fiction. But what percentage of the features that you started, like, how do I describe this? What percentage of the features that ended up in the level editor when you released were in your first iteration, the one that you made for yourself?
Maybe 60%.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you did a few more iterations maybe for yourself along the way, and then a big chunk of that was polishing it up for players.
Yeah,
cool.
Definitely. When I first started out, actually, as I built out the level editor and I like added more polish / ease of use for people to do things with, it like opened up a lot of game design things that I did not see from before, because it was a lot of me like discovering, oh, if I add in the these things called spawner groups that allow you to shoot out a bunch of enemies at once, and you can it'll just like automatically place all the enemies and around the arena for you. Me adding in that feature opened the door to like 40 levels of me just being like, oh, I want to just mess around with this thing.
Awesome.
Because I really enjoy doing that. And so, yeah, like every time that I would add in new like quality of life things or like something that would make it easier for somebody else to be able to jump in and play with the level editor, it also just like opened the door for me as well personally, where you like one of the things that I took for granted throughout almost the entire development of Hyperdot until maybe the very, very end is copy paste. And that is like, yeah, that is something that you don't normally think about. Oh yeah, copy paste. I didn't have copy paste in the level editor. And then when I did have copy paste, it was a little rudimentary where it was just like literally copy this enemy and paste it. And then if I wanted to change any of the specific values, I'd have to go in like one at a time and change the specific values inside of that enemy. But like copying just one part of like an enemy, just like say, I want this enemy to shoot like 5 times a second or whatever. And then just being able to paste that on whatever enemy and just have that there, that just like that also opened the door to so many different things because I was just I was so worried like, oh, well, I made like 50 different enemies. I don't have to go into each 50, like all 50 enemies and change this value. So I'll just not, or like this level's not working out and stuff like that. But like just being able to be like, all right, copy and then just paste on all of these things, and it would just work.
Yeah,
it gives you like the freedom and the flexibility to be able to make levels that you would otherwise not want to do because it's too tedious.
Yeah, and it speeds up the process too, right? It allows you to experiment more frequently as a result of that. Not just use the developer, but just like, as a player, you could copy an enemy that you thought was cool and then like paste it into other levels and stuff if you wanted to, right?
Yeah, and the coolest thing is like just being able to press the start button at any point during the editor and just to be like, all right, I'm testing this now. Like that is really good for iteration.
Yeah. It's if listeners are hearing your copy paste Eureka and are like, well, duh. Every developer will find themselves in a place where they'll get themselves into a workflow they understand.
Yeah.
And not realize how slow it is.
Yeah.
And then suddenly when you because putting in the work to make it faster means you have to learn a new set of habits, but also the development time to improve or completely modify your workflow doesn't always seem worth it when you're in the middle of making stuff. And then as soon as you do, you immediately are like, why didn't I do this months ago?
Yeah.
This is so great and amazing, and I wasted so much time. But you always wait too long before you get that point. I mean, maybe it's the right time. Maybe that's the point at which you finally are like, well, okay, now I've solidified a lot of this workflow. Now let me automate it, right? And so maybe prior to that, you might be penning yourself in or whatever. But like, then every time you describe how it works to somebody else, it's like, well, that seems really obvious, but it's only in retrospect.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, they're not working in the same. They're not getting a player who's creating a level doesn't have the same relationship with the game as the developer, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And not the same relationship whatsoever as like the history of the game's creation. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, we did, I don't know if we would call it a level editor in Widget Satchel.
I mean, it was internal tools only, but I built level editing tools for the rest of you.
Yes.
Right.
Sure.
Right. I guess the only reason I bring it up is like to segue into a different topic, which is like the experience I had with that was that it made it really a lot easier to get ideas in my head and then quickly get them out into the game world.
Right.
Which is kind of what you were describing, Charles. Like you had these new features in the level editor, and then all of a sudden it like opened your mind up to making dozens more levels around these certain new features because you could free up some of your brain to think about the creation rather than the technicalities of it, perhaps.
Yeah.
I think the interesting flip side of that is like your level editor is constrained by the world of the game that you have created and the rules therein. And that constraint can also be like actually a catalyst for creativity. Because if you have like no rules, then it's difficult to like think of new things. If you have a limited set of rules and specific constraints, sometimes it's easier to be creative because those rules push you in new ways. And I can kind of hear both sides of that story coming out in the way that you're talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really interesting to see, especially now that the game's out, and like being able to see like people's like clips of their levels that they made and stuff like that. It's interesting to see the variety of ways that people like messed around or interpreted some of the tools that I put in there, where it's like, oh yeah, I never would have thought to do that. I actually saw somebody posted a custom level that they made on Steam, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll check this out. And the level was basically designed around collecting slow power-ups, which would slow down time. And the entire point was you need to continue to collect these slow power-ups, or else when you run out, then everything will go in like full speed, but everything's at hyper speed.
Yeah.
So like you'd have to balance. Okay, I have to go for these slow power-ups, but I also need to get these tokens. And things like that. So it was like a super like, wow, that's super cool. And I never like thought of doing that myself. And it's like really gratifying to see people take those kind of take the tools that I made and provided, and then seeing those constraints and seeing all of the different variables, and then tweaking it to be like, oh yes, here's a interesting spin on one of the power ups that I had.
Yeah, like seeing somebody make something like that. I mean, they put in the time, they obviously like the game. That's got to be really gratifying. But also, like, those mechanics work. They understand the game, like, at a really fundamental level, and that's got to be pretty cool too.
Yeah, no, it's always like a really humbling experience just to see like the people that like reach out and be like, oh yeah, I really enjoyed this, and then or just like seeing pictures or clips of people doing crazy things inside of the level editor, or even just playing the game in general. It's really humbling.
That's true. Actually, we didn't talk about that, but like Hyperdot now has over 200,000 players. Like over 200,000 people have played the game, which is big. So over 200,000 people have potentially seen the your level editor and stuff.
Yeah, there is an achievement tied to it, so there's a high chance that people just went in there just to get that achievement. That was the point.
Well, that's a good question, actually, because like I think there's not a ton of games that have level editors, but I think there are a decent amount that have level editors, but like there's no reason for a player to engage with it. And I know that I guess you added an achievement to get people to even open up the menu, but like, are there other ways to convince people to even attempt designing a level in your game?
Yeah, so there are actually two different achievements that are associated with that. So there's literally create any level. You can just say go in there, save, and then you'd win. You get that achievement. And then there's another one where you need to add 4 modifiers to your level. And that one in particular is more like actually no, there's 3, because there's also another one where you need to make 3 waves in your level editor, which is also really easy. If you just go into enemies and then tap add wave 3 times and then save, you did it. But it's just to encourage you to like, oh, there's a level editor, I want to look and check this out, kind of thing. Versus just having something where it's like, oh yes, there's a level editor. It's not really like a part of anything, or it's not really like promoted and stuff like that. And that was actually one of the 3 things that like when I was making the game, and then I decided to add in a level editor in game for the players, is that became the 3rd pillar of what Hyperdot is. So it has Hyperdot has single player, multiplayer, and then level editor. And then like all 3 of these things like are kind of interweaved and interwoven between each other in some way, shape, or form. But the level editor kind of ties it all together, because you can make your own single player levels or multiplayer levels that you can play with your friends and stuff like that. So yeah, I wanted to encourage just like experimentation through the achievements, and then hopefully through that they were able to be like, oh, maybe I can make a crazy level for multiplayer when people or like friends come over or something like that, or we're at like a party and it's like, oh, can you survive this challenge, or I don't know. So yeah,
that makes me want to make a Hyperdot level that Charles can't beat.
Good luck.
I was like, yay! Oh.
Yeah, but like it's like one thing I really like about what level editors can do is it can open up the idea of level design to players who haven't ever really thought about game dev tools as a thing you can even experiment with.
Mm-hmm.
That's like something that's really great about like these kinds of things.
Yeah, I was definitely influenced by a bunch of level editors / create a level or stage or map or whatever, and a ton of like different games. Like Littlebigplanet is one of my favorite franchises, because it's just like the tools, especially Littlebigplanet 2 was the one that really hit me. But like the tools and the creativity of like some of the people in that community are just amazing and phenomenal, where I would spend hours and hours trying to like create whatever levels I want, and things like that, or like Mod Nation Racers, where I'd make like I'd spend again hours working on these cool characters and then making this like this track that I'm super proud of, and then being able to like see that, and then in particular with like Littlebigplanet and Mod Nation, I was able to share that. But like even before then, there's a PS2 hidden gem. I don't know if it was a gem, but of HSX, or Hypersonic Extreme, which is like a futuristic racer. But the level editor in that was insane, especially for the time, where you're able to make all sorts of different levels and all sorts of different things. You can place all these buildings and track designs. You can do splits and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And like getting a bunch of like influence from that has been phenomenal in terms of like, oh yeah, these are some of the things that I would want in a level editor for Hyperdot, because I've played all of these other games that have level editors in it, or have enjoyed a lot of those kind of things.
Yeah, I but one thing I want to know about more, because you asked me about this a lot while you were developing the game anyways, is like what you could do to make people more interested in like pursuing creation of a level. Does that makes sense? So it's like, I remember you were asking, we were talking about like Super Mario Maker and Super Mario Maker 2, and like how that makes making a Mario level very approachable, because like you easily can just paste blocks everywhere and do random things. And like I think you were talked about like Hyperdot feeling like it was like menus within menus, and it felt more difficult to get into. Did you end up doing anything to make that easier for people?
From where I was when I was talking to you about that, definitely.
Okay.
I still think that I didn't quite hit that mark. Where it was like, oh yes, if you just go into a level editor, you're going to be able to make whatever you want from your wildest dreams, or whatever. I think that it's still, there's like a slight barrier to entry, because the level editor gets pretty detailed, and stuff. And I feel like things like Mario Maker, it makes it really easy to make and finish a level without having to. Or I guess this is kind of similar to what Ellen was talking about. There's a lot of like limitations in it. There's it's a grid based level editor, so you already are getting by without having to worry about like, oh, okay, you need like specific coordinates or things like that, or moving in like a 3D environment, and things like that. So that is super helpful. And then like the interface of particularly I guess Mario Maker 1. Of just like tapping the screen, and then wherever you tapped, you made ground, and then you're like, oh cool, and then you click, here's a Koopa, drag the Koopa, and then tap on the screen, and then that works.
It's purely visual creation, right?
Yeah.
Like you can have things interact with it in a way that sort of feels like you're programming behavior, but the only way you can really do that is by placing things in places, right?
Yes.
And even Littlebigplanet is like that too, where Littlebigplanet has a remarkable set of programming tools. And Dreams as well. Dreams probably loses the thread a little bit because of how in-depth and complicated it is. But with Littlebigplanet, everything was stitched together, like using their metaphors even. Like you can have, like when you had a sensor, you dragged a string to the thing that it interacted with. And so it really was like playing with toys, playing with Legos, putting things together, even though you were programming complex behaviors. Whereas with Hyperdot, because everything's happening on stage and the way all levels work is that enemies enter the stage. That is the central metaphor of time in Hyperdot. It's less about drawing and more about writing, right? You were creating a sequencer. And so it's a little harder to represent that visually, right?
Yeah, definitely. And there's definitely ways to get around that. Now in retrospect, I'm able to be like, okay, these kind of things would have probably worked and stuff like that. Where because I support so many different input devices, that was also another thing. So like, how do I have this interface work well with a controller and a mouse and whatever have you that I use that day? It's just trying to like find that balance and be like, okay, yeah, I want to have this be super flexible and be super be able to create everything that I have made so far, but then also be approachable so that if you had like, I have this crazy idea, what if I did blah, and you normally don't mess with level editors, like, are you able to do that? And again, I'm not entirely sure if I hit that on the mark, but yeah, like what you're talking about with like, I'm making it more of a sequencer than like a blank canvas. I think that is like, that was probably one of my biggest things that I had to figure out is like, how do I, especially after I got the live preview of what you're actually doing in real time, like how do I show you the like timing and things like that within the level editor, and make it so that it's like, oh, okay, I understand timing and things like that. But I also had to balance doing level editor stuff with the rest of the game as well.
Right.
Which is part of the reason why I'm like, oh, maybe I can make like a simplified mode or something like that. But like, that's extra additional time.
Right. Yeah. Right. It was almost easier to give players all the tools you had than to give them just the few tools you knew they'd understand. Yeah. And ultimately, you do have to accept that like it's not going to be as intuitive as gameplay, but you have to trust that a player who enters your level editor is up for that.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
But you never know, right? You did ask for a lot of feedback in that process, and I think that reflects a very honest, a very common feeling, which is like, I don't know if this will work, and there's almost nothing that can prove to me that it will.
Yeah, especially with like the level editor, because the level editor is really it is a feature that is for people who are familiar with Hyperdot already, or who have played Hyperdot and are somewhat experienced with Hyperdot. And that is like in stark contrast to single player and multiplayer, where I can just set you down in front of single player and say go, and then within the first 10 seconds, you'll understand 80% of the game.
Yeah. You might have died already.
Yeah, you might have died already.
But that'll help you understand.
Oh. Yeah, I should probably not touch that. So yeah, and it's really like intuitive, but it's really hard. It was especially trying to get like playtest and people trying out the level editor. It was really hard to get people to be able to like, okay, so I want you to try out this level editor. I'm looking for like some more in-depth feedback from the level editor, and just being like, okay, here's the level editor. Go at it. I did like twice, where I was just it was at playtest events, and I was like, oh yeah, go at it, and I didn't really get that much valuable information at it because it was coming from people who jumped straight into the level editor and did not play and had no idea what Hyperdot was.
Right.
So it was harder to be like, oh yes, I understand how these squares and these triangles work.
And you can make a
they
level
didn't
editor.
even
You can make a level editor that does that is approachable at first jump. But that's not what you wanted to make, right?
Yeah,
That wasn't
yeah.
in service of the goal of your level editor.
Yeah, especially because I was trying to kill two birds with one stone, where I was like, oh yes, I want to also have a like full featured level editor, and then I want to have a level editor inside of the game that people could play.
Yeah.
And the 3 points of a triangle where I'm like, okay, I want a full feature level editor, I want to have all the levels in it, and then I want simplicity.
The iron triangle.
Yeah.
And like it didn't really even occur to me until later, where I was like, oh yes, there's that third point of making it so simple that like literally anybody can just like jump in and make whatever they want.
Hyperdot has such elegant design. And one of the reasons I like the game so much is because of its elegance. 'Cause I'm just attracted to anything like that. Like, and I see elegance in like the mathematical sense, you know, where it's like, this is the thing. It's the thing it needs to be. There's nothing extra. It's right there and it works and it's perfect exactly the way that it is. But the level editor for sure, like it needs to build on that like experience of the elegance, I think, for it to work. And that's, I don't know where I was going with that, except for I see what you're saying, that it's not something that people could just jump into. But I know where I was headed with this. Here we go. I got it back. Well, like it's because, like you were saying, Mark, the gameplay is really based around time. Mm-hmm. And it's not based around the very intuitive sense of like motion and physicality that I think, like you were saying, Littlebigplanet is, or like, you know, lots of other level editors and lots of games in general that's just built on this intuitive sense of the mechanics of motion. But the mechanics of time are weird and a little squidgy. Mm-hmm. And not as intuitive to engage with. So it makes sense that you need to kind of like train your mind in that space before you would feel confident as a player / creator to make progress in a sandbox, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the level design within Hyperdot versus just like the outright mechanics, because, you know, the main mechanic is move. So it's not like, or a lot of like the cool and interesting and like clever things that you can do is really based on the level design of the game. So you have to mess around and play with all the different variables and like see all these different angles within the level editor, or within like all the things that you have available in the level editor. And then at that point, you'd be able to be like, okay, now I feel confident enough to make whatever I want to make in it. But yeah, it's not as like simple to understand as just like move out of the way of shapes and things like that.
So I know that like you made your level editor specifically built so that you can make a level that anybody else could make as well. Is the developer. But I guess, would you recommend that as a strategy for other people who wanted to make a level editor accessible to a player? And like, would that be something that, or are there other things that you would like want to remove just to make it more simple for people to like make levels? I guess you would talk about like a simple mode for level editors.
Having, or especially if you want to have the level editor be more accessible to people, having like a simplified version of that, because having all the different variables and parameters and things showing on the screen is a little intimidating. But having like an easier to understand / follow, or like easier to just do things in version of the level editor is one way of doing that. I know the Trials series, they had I'm most familiar. I guess I'm really familiar with almost all of them. But the Trials Fusion level editor, there was like, here's simple mode, and then here's advanced mode. And in simple mode, you're just on the track that you made, and then that's it. You're not moving around. You're not doing all these crazy things. There's not as much things being shown to you at the same time and stuff like that. It's still fairly advanced in terms of level editor. On the level editor spectrum, it's still fairly advanced. But it is good to even just use that as like, okay, I have a skeleton idea of what I want to do. I'll use the simple mode to do this, and then when you want to get into the nitty gritty, that's when you switch over to the advanced mode and go in there and do all the logic craziness and go off the track and, do all your cool aesthetic things and stuff like that.
Right.
I like the way people emphasize aesthetic.
Aesthetic.
Yeah.
Aesthetic.
It's interesting because Hyperdot, as you described the level editor, it became the third mode of the game fairly late in production, and so you didn't do what some games do that focus on a level editor, which is design the game around the usability of the editor. Right? I think you probably got away with it, not having to constrain your mechanics or your systems by what could be easily taught in the editor. I think right. you rose to meet the demands that you inadvertently set for the editor. But I think a lot of times when you're thinking of it earlier in the process, you can incorporate it more directly into the ultimate shape of the game. So the features you come up with are features that you would only approve for design or for production if you can also workshop an elegant way to teach it in the editor. That said, that approach can limit what your creativity is because you're afraid that you won't be able to explain it properly. But maybe if you just hammer away at it, you will be. So there's no right answer to how you approach it. Like with all things in games, you can do it in any order. But it's interesting the way you did it was the challenges you faced came from the fact that the level editor was the last big part to be designed in a game design sense. Whereas if you knew from jump this game's going to have a level editor, then you might have had a different set of challenges as you approached the end of development.
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely really interesting to see games like Mario Maker or Levelhead or Littlebigplanet, like games that have the level editor being the central focus of the game. Like it is known by its level editor. Those, they intrinsically they're at parity with each other. Of this is the game, and then the level editor is the crux around it. And then there are other games like Cluster Truck that have a level editor, but it was something that was it's definitely not as emphasized, or it's not as this is the reason why you play Cluster Truck, so you can make
it's a bonus.
Bonus, yep.
Yeah, it's like a bonus kind of thing. So there's a lot of trying to find that push and pull of okay, how much do I want to emphasize on these things? How much do I want to be well, if I can't explain this to somebody in the level editor, how do you should I include this in the game or and stuff like that? And it's totally like you said, it would change how I would have approached doing the level editor if I did start out with saying, okay, right at the beginning, I'm going to have a level editor, and it's going to be the definitive third pillar of this game. People are going to go to this game because of the level editor. And because it's the third pillar, but that came out, as you said, later. It was more, rising to that, to get to that third pillar status, or at least a bullet point on the back of the box.
Right. I think about Mario Maker and how it is fairly robust, even the first version of the first Mario Maker. But you could tell that they purposely limited some of the tools they gave to players because the level editor was the main thing. And they would add it later once the user base became the diehards. And suddenly you could do more complicated setups with doors and keys and locks and different things because so it is different, right? And so you end up having
definitely
the alternate is to have confusing things in the level editor but more robust gameplay. And so there's not a right way.
Yeah, that's actually really fascinating that you brought that up because I think that Super Mario Maker specifically you could tell the difference between the first game and the second game in how they added more complexity to things. And I think part of it is just they figured out a way to visually represent that in the creation tool of Super Mario Maker. The thing I always think about is the ramps. There aren't any ramps in the first game, But they added it in the second game. I think they just figured out how to do it. But the way that it's done, I'm not personally super satisfied with. In that, like, you extend it. There's a limit to like how you actually create the ramp and like where it can go.
Yeah.
Due to how they represented it on in the creation tool.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I think it made things more. I guess it limited what option. Like you were saying, I guess it limited options that they were allowing people to create. In Super Mario Maker, because like they didn't develop this a visual way to represent this in the tool.
Right. Another example I could think of is like the moving platforms, the ones made out of skulls. There's two types, fast and slow. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's players can build mechanics around those two speeds, and that's enough complexity. But in proper Mario games, you can make those things move as fast as you want them to, as fast as the level designer wants, and the player isn't necessarily handicapped by not knowing how fast it's going to move when they jump on it. So it's not one of those things that requires clarity as a player. But when you're designing a level in a level editor tool, you two options, fast and slow. And that's the compromise they made. And even though they add more complicated things, I think that's still the way it is in Mario Maker 2. Mm-hmm. And so you always got to think about that, like what value versus what troubles will you have by adding a feature, and what's worth it and what isn't, right?
Yeah, more features doesn't necessarily mean more fun.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, shoot a rubber band at the wall. I think that's fun. So, you know who's a cool person?
No.
I do.
Okay, there are actually lots of cool people.
There are a lot of cool people in the world.
They're on this show, but also Dale is a really cool person. One of the reasons Dale is cool is because Dale is like creme de la creme of Twitter content curator. The tweets that she puts out on the Nice Games Club Twitter feed are very entertaining and very valuable.
Chef's kiss.
Yeah, mwah. I feel like she probably does that. Like after she sends out a tweet, she picks up her phone and she holds it and she like wafts it. She says, "Oh, it's a nice bouquet." Mwah.
Yes.
Here's an example about a review for Widget Satchel, and it was so heartwarming. It was wonderful to read it. It said, and this was Phoenix Sims, "This was a little different from the games I usually review or seek out, and I loved how it pushed my gaming boundaries. Helped sharpen my critical thinking as well." Those are the kind of tweets you get. The kind of tweets about broadening your horizons. Also sometimes about cats.
There's a lot of them about cats.
Yeah, fair warning, there's going to be a lot of those.
Of course.
Yeah.
Valuable internet cat content.
So how can people get this lovely, lovely content in front of their faces?
Well, the best way to do it would be to go onto Twitter and find the Nice Games Club Twitter feed that Dale is responsible for, and that is at Nice Games Club. So follow us and at us and retweet stuff. It's a fun time.
So yeah, I wanted to ask like what each of our favorite level editors in games would be. Mm-hmm. The easy answer would be like Super Mario Maker, and I guess you can answer that if you want. But
pick me first because I can answer that, and then and then I don't have to think very hard.
Do you want to talk about it first?
Yeah, I'll talk about it.
I mean,
there's other examples, but that one is great. And like one of the things that I think I've talked about this on the show before when we've talked about dreams or about Super Mario Maker is that I will get really, really deep into a level editor, a game that's a level editor, right? And it's because I'm a game designer and I want to build those things. And then I quickly am like, wait, I could use this time for something of my own, probably.
Yeah.
So I never get that far. I never spend a lot of time. I never get to join the upper echelons of the creators in these spaces, which I'm always very jealous of those people who can like just make mountains of amazing content. Because it's all very genius and it's a good learning tool if you're a game designer. But Mario Maker is one where it wasn't just about making the thing and like the normal sort of satisfaction I get from building something. It's fun to play as a game. And I don't mean the playing part. I mean the making levels part is just fun. It's fun like drawing is fun. And that's not something I felt with Littlebigplanet, for example, which was much more about carefully aligning all these cute little elements. And it was still very satisfying, but much more in the same way that when I work on my own projects is creatively fulfilling and satisfying. With Mario Maker, it's kind of fun just to goof around in there. And I think that it's a great balance because you get that same satisfaction of sort of building something, making something, that creativity, but also it's just kind of a joy to use. Even when it's kind of like frustrating or weird, like you're kind of half broken, you're like, I'm having a good time. And so I think that it's a rare thing, and it was really cool to see.
Is that the first one or the second one?
I will say I liked the first one because I really enjoyed using the Wii U. That's very true. I got used to it, but it was much harder to use the Switch for that purpose. Right. Even using like a capacitive stylus, it just wasn't as good, frankly.
I would agree with that. It's kind of because that's a hardware limitation. They needed to port it to the Switch because not a lot of people had Wii U's. But but you definitely lost something. Like the Wii U was like kind of the perfect system for that kind of a game.
Considering how much better ultimately Super Mario Maker 2 is, it's amazing how close it feels to the first one because of that advantage the Wii U hardware had.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. I guess I'll go next. I'm going to also cheat and suggest Dreams as my favorite one. Specifically, not because, arguably, like, it's not even a level ever. It's a game creator. And that's why I like it. Because, like, I think it makes game development more accessible for people. It allows people to make games on a console, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
Well, it's not unheard of. There are a few things that had, like, what was it? The Kodu?
Kodu Game Lab, Project
Kodu
Spark.
Game Lab, and Project Spark. Yeah. But this is the best one of those of console game creator things.
Oh yeah.
And like I think that's an amazing thing because like it allows people without fancy hardware, they just have a PS4 and they just happen to do it because they wanted to play Horizon Zero Dawn or whatever. They can make games on the side. And I think that's like a beautiful thing for people. And like, there's a lot of creative things coming out of it. There are some less creative things because a lot of it is just, I made SpongeBob.
Right. It's
check
very,
this out, but
very, lots of fan art, which is what happens when you give tools to everybody. People are just inspired by things they like.
But honestly, that's good too. A lot of people start out their art careers making fan art of SpongeBob. So like
specifically, yeah.
Yeah,
you don't find Dreams a little bit too open-ended? I mean, it's basically just Unity, more or less.
That's kind of why I was saying it's cheating because like it's not a game so much. Dreams is really a game engine.
Yeah,
it's Unity. It is literally
right. Which is itself incredibly valuable that it is that open-ended. But it does lose something. It's harder for some people to get into. Probably some of the people who it's targeted at.
Fewer constraints.
Yeah, it's fewer constraints. You literally can build whatever you want in it. And so like that, because it's it's a game engine. And so like, but that's also why people had a hard time understanding what Dreams was. Part of it was just like, they didn't describe it in the marketing. They were just like, this is Dreams. And they don't describe what Dreams is. It just showed what people made in it. But like, it's hard to describe it because like, it's literally just a game you make games with. But I think that it making something, I think that people being able to like see what it's like to develop a game and it being so accessible or marketed in a way that makes it feel like it's a game is really powerful. And so like in a few years, I hope to see some of the people who are making Dreams games either be able to like, show those games off outside of the PS4 because we're moving on to the next gen soon anyways, or see them move on to a new game engine where like they can build games for other consoles or PC or Mac or whatever, because I'm really excited to see like those kind of creators go, I started in Dreams but now look at me, that'd be really cool.
Well, there's other things that have that history. So Flash is one of them. And something where you didn't set out to make games exactly, but then you develop the skills to do it. I think the real question is going to be: are people who are really get into dreams, are they going to be burdened by all the specifics of building in that engine in a way that can happen to people using Unreal or Unity or Flash or something where you become so specifically talented or oriented towards the skills you need for that tool, and it becomes less about, or you're less aware of the lessons you're learning as a game designer. Hopefully for dreams that will not be the case, but I do wonder who in that cohort of people making astounding pieces of work will graduate from there.
Right. I guess like what I would like to see ideally from that, honestly, is to just allow people who don't have dreams to be able to play games made in dreams.
Yeah.
Because then like you don't have to learn a new tool if you don't want to. Not that like it's a good thing to learn multiple tools, multiple engines, but that would be really good.
And I feel like that's kind of that is the missing piece to make it a game engine, right? Like I think you're right. It doesn't really feel like a level editor because it doesn't have the constraints that a level would. Like a level is constrained by the rules of the game in which it sits. And Dreams doesn't have that, but it's also not something where you can like take your game made in Dreams and put it on the Switch. So it's not really a game. It's weird, which probably was contributed to why it's hard to market.
Right. That's very true.
Mine's really quick.
Oh, okay.
I actually haven't done a lot of level editing, and now I'm very inspired by this conversation to go start doing some doodling. But I had to kind of dig way back into my early years when I was first starting to get into games, and I didn't have any game consoles or anything in my house. We had like the computer, and we had some computer games. But whenever I'd go visit my friend Joe, who lived up by my grandpa, I would go over and we would play the Nintendo and Super Nintendo and the computer, and we'd play everything just for hours and hours and hours. And he played StarCraft. And if I remember correctly, there was a level editor in StarCraft.
I think so, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
And that's actually the thing that got me into games in general, was playing games with him, but also like with the computer games, the interface was so different. I was really struggling to get a handle on how StarCraft worked. And the way that I started to learn it was actually by skipping over the entire campaign, like going into the level editor and be like, okay, what happens when this does this? What happens when this does this? And like sandboxing out the logic a little bit to understand what the different units did. And then I returned to the game and actually played it. And I think I didn't realize it until this very conversation because I haven't thought about it in such a long time, but that was actually like a pretty defining, like that was an experience that really defined my relationship with games going forward, because that kind of experimentation is something I seek out immediately with any game that I play.
Yeah.
So
wow. That's fascinating too, because like I didn't think about it, level editors in that way, but like it allows you to experiment with the design of things so that like you can better understand how to complete the game.
Yeah.
The game. You can understand the idiosyncrasies of all of the different parts.
Yeah.
And allows you to like experiment with different combinations that like the developer might already have done in the game. And you can use that as knowledge to help you complete levels.
And I don't think I went about it that like systematically when I was 7 or 8, or I don't even remember. But yeah, I think that's an interesting dynamic between the level editor and the game itself that I think is like, I think it might speak a lot towards the way that like Hyperdot, the relationship between the level editor and Hyperdot, like you talk about it in a way that's so integrated, Charles. And I feel like that's, I don't know, it resonates a little bit more with me.
Mm-hmm. Sure. No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially, I've actually seen people like go in and then try out like, oh, what are these stars all about? I don't understand them. And then they just like put in stars and they're like, oh, that's what stars are all about. And then like, they like, I haven't seen like the super nitty gritty of people like going in and messing with parameters and being like, oh, that's the reason why this level was designed this way. But I've definitely seen like people go in and be like, oh yes, I'll make a level completely out of one enemy type or or even in the free play mode, and then just like change the modifiers to be this one specific thing, so I can understand how this works. That's awesome that has happened with you, and it was such a defining moment.
Yeah, I just can't believe I haven't thought about it in so many years.
Charles, you're up.
You can't say Hyperdot.
Oh, no.
Good.
I mean, I can go hours on with level editors, but okay, so I mentioned a couple. One, probably my favorite one is Mod Nation Racers.
Oh, okay.
I think that's probably my favorite. That's the one that it has it has 3 different editors in it. It has a character creator, it has a vehicle creator, and then it has a track editor.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I spent so much time in all of those things. I was like waiting for that game to come out. I kept on looking at the E3 trailer. I was just like, this is all I want in life. And then I played it, and then I love it. And if the PS3 worked today, I'd still be playing it because it's so good. It's just that the load times are really, really long.
Yeah. That's one that didn't get a lot of success, right? It was meant to be in the Sony branded it alongside Littlebigplanet. It wasn't made by the same people, but like as part of it's like, we're going to make a whole genre of creation games.
Yeah, the play, create, share.
Yeah, it didn't do good, right?
Yeah, it did okay.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't do the greatest, and that's when United Front Games moved on to make Sleeping Dogs, which is a totally different game.
Yeah.
And moved on and whatnot. But yeah, Mod Nation Racers is like up there as one of my favorite level editors. Another one that is like I really always have enjoyed the concept of is Trackmania, in the Trackmania series, which is a racing series that is very like structured around the fact that you can make your own levels and all this other stuff. But in some of the earlier Trackmanias, there is a particular mode called Puzzle Mode, where instead of just racing or instead of just doing a level editor, there was a mode where you'd have a certain amount of like types of puzzle pieces, and then you had to either complete or design a track that fulfilled a set of parameters and stuff. So like there's already a finish line, a starting line, and then one checkpoint. And then you'd have to design a level that will allow you to get to the checkpoint and then get to the finish line within a certain amount of time and stuff like that. And like I've really been super into like that puzzle mode aspect and things like that, which is like something that I would love to figure out how to like even recreate for like Hyperdot. That would be awesome to do. And then I guess a quick shout out to the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 level editor.
I
really
forgot
love
that
that.
existed.
Oh, it was so good. Another quick shout out to Mega Man Powered Up, because I always force my brother to play my levels.
Did he beat them?
Not all of them, no.
Probably got bored partway through.
Oh, wow.
Ooh,
Dang.
this is getting fierce.
He's a younger man. He didn't know what he was doing.
Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe we should shut this down before it gets serious.
So, all right, Charles, from what I am told, you are also on Twitter.
Yes, I am on Twitter.
All right. No, you say your handle. We practiced earlier. I know I can say it, but
Okay. Yes, but I'd like to see you do. No,
okay.
It's all good. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at DarkHazeTG, or you can follow at Tribe Games for updates on Hyperdot and the like.
Yeah, and we will link to both of those Twitter accounts in the show notes. And also, you can and you should buy Hyperdot on multiple platforms. Which platforms can people buy it on, Charles?
Yeah, so Hyperdot is available on Xbox and Windows 10 as Play Anywhere and on Xbox Game Pass. And you can play it on Steam and Itch on PC, Mac, and Linux.
Very cool. And you can buy the soundtrack separately. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, you can actually get the soundtrack. It's actually also available on streaming services. So if you have Spotify, you can check it out on there.
Get those sweet half pennies from every listen.
Yeah.
Well, that's our show. You can check out our website, nicegames.club, for show notes and links to the resources and all the fun things on today's topics. If you like this episode, give us a review on your favorite podcast app and tell your friends. Independent podcasts like ours rely on word of mouth to grow. We love hearing from our listeners. For a quick way to give us feedback on the show, head over to nicegames.club/feedback and fill out a short little form. You can also get in touch with your nice hosts on Twitter, so much Twitter, at Nice Games Club, where Dale, our amazing Twitter chef Dale, tweets about game dev resources and armor-providing face masks. Or you can email us through contact@nicegames.club. Ask us questions, suggest topics, or just say hello.
So, until we start again, remember to
play nice
and make nice.
That should go on a bumper sticker. It's a fun time.
Nice Games Club. It's a fun time. There's our post-show content.